Let's start with the good news. Right now, public approval of unions is the highest it's been in the US in nearly 60 years. 71% of Americans say they approve of labor unions, which, as AFL-CIO President Liz Schuler recently pointed out, means that unions are even more popular than hot dogs. There's also been a lot of excitement around new organizing activity in the service sector, which has been a notoriously difficult area for organized labor to break into. Workers at chains that have never previously been unionized, including Trader Joe's, Chipotle, and of course Starbucks, have all held successful union votes this year. To date, over 200 Starbucks locations have won union elections. But all the attention on labor organizing means that there will inevitably also be cynical or misguided attempts to ride the wave. For instance, last week, a group of Etsy sellers launched a new sellers guild that describes itself as being, quote, modeled after a union as much as possible, with the same goals as a more traditional union and other organized labor movements. When you go to this group's website, you can find an announcement that reads, Etsy sellers aren't just folksy crafters and side hobbyists, we're workers. The group says that they hope to do things like organize independent sellers, challenge Etsy's fee increases, and, quote, speak with one unified voice for the interests of indie sellers to the media, legislators, and the general public. So that's all well and good, and these Etsy merchants are, of course, free to form any kind of advocacy group they want, but make no mistake, this is not a union and has nothing to do with worker power, at least not in any meaningful way. In fact, a spokesperson for the guild has even said that they'd eventually like to help indie sellers hire their own employees, meaning that the so-called union is apparently willing to represent both workers and bosses. It's heartening that in this moment, more and more people are inspired by unions and thinking of themselves as workers. But when we start to muddle exactly what a union is and what it does, or when we decide that anything can count as a union as long as workers are involved, it makes it that much harder to recognize that not all workers' groups are created equal. Real unions have a certain kind of leverage that more informal advocacy groups don't, which is that they enable workers to check the immense power of employers through collective bargaining agreements. Something like the Etsy Sellers Guild can function as an occasional pressure group, but doesn't fundamentally alter the balance of power between capital and labor. That said, a well-meaning but slightly confused Sellers Guild is far from the worst offender when it comes to warping what the labor movement is actually about. The most egregious example might be a venture capital-backed startup called Unit of Work that's trying to brand itself as an exciting new resource for workers who want to unionize their workplaces. Unit offers consulting and legal advice to workers who are trying to unionize, and so far they've helped 2 workplaces form unions, and they say that they're working with several others. But they're also clear that first and foremost, they're a money-making venture. According to an LA Times piece on Unit's model, quote, once a contract is in place, members of the new union can decide to pay Unit a monthly fee, similar to traditional union dues, to keep providing support. So first of all, let's be clear, the people who run Unit of Work might be genuine about wanting to help people organize their workplaces, but they offer literally nothing other than the exact same resources that a traditional union would. As it happens, you can also access these same resources for free from organizations like Labor Notes or the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee. What Unit is doing, on the other hand, is trying to take advantage of low union density and a broad lack of information among the general public about the process of unionization to make money. And there's another interesting twist in the Unit model even beyond their profit-seeking. They don't have any ties to the actually existing labor movement. Rather than working with national unions, Unit is actively encouraging workers to form independent unions. This is explicitly by design. Tim Draper, one of the venture capitalists behind Unit, who the LA Times describes as an outspoken critic of organized labor and public sector unions in particular, has said, quote, Unit of Work is making unions decentralized. That will be awesome. Centralized unions tend to restrain trade, and government unions create bloated bureaucracy and poor government service on the whole. Government unions are the antithesis of a free country. So here's the problem. An independent union is one that is not affiliated with an established national union, such as the UAW or the SEIU, to name just 2 examples. Now, independent unions, of course, can be useful in some contexts, particularly when it comes to certain workplaces or sectors that established unions don't have the capacity or the desire to organize. But at the same time, when it comes to things like negotiating contracts and flexing political power, independent unions ultimately lack the leverage, experience, and financial resources that larger national unions have, which is probably why an anti-union venture capitalist like Tim Draper likes them so much. The so-called centralization that Draper opposes is just another word for a strong and cohesive labor movement. And this is key. Unions do much more than just improve working conditions for their members. By checking the power of employers, they're also capable of reducing inequality across society more broadly. And in the US, when union density has been high, the presence of unions has raised wages and improved workplace standards for all workers, even those who aren't in unions. In fact, one major reason why the American middle class has collapsed and average wages have been stagnant for decades is that union density has fallen dramatically after 40 years of attacks from capitalists like Tim Draper and right-wing politicians. We can and should celebrate the growing popularity of unions while also recognizing that not everything that calls itself pro-union is necessarily an asset to the labor movement. A fighting labor movement is distinctive in that it gives workers the leverage to force concessions from capital. And at the end of the day, that's something that pseudo-unions like the Etsy Guild or for-profit companies like Unit that envision unions only as a series of small, decentralized shops will never be able to achieve. If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.